This I call high crimes. Seemingly violating the claim that America doesn't negotiate with terrorists and with hostage takers, reports revealed that the Obama administration organized a secret airlift to smuggle $400 million in cash to Tehran, Iran, which coincided with the January release of 4 Americans taken prisoner. This is what part of the mainstream media is trying to sell us. Oh, there are a few outlets that are saying, oh, gee, you really can't do this. It's really wrong. And so they asked the president a couple of softball questions about it. But reports say that wooden pallets stacked with shrink-wrapped cash of a variety of currencies were loaded onto an unmarked cargo plane and flown to Iran. The Wall Street Journal reports that American officials procured the money from banks in Switzerland and the Netherlands. Actually, I am here to report to you that no bank would allow cash in such quantities to even be deposited. They don't have access to that. They're not going to let $400 million in cash leave their bank. They need the liquidity in their bank in order to loan money out. This is the basis for the stability of banks. International law prohibits the movement of quantities of cash, specifically because it is not traceable to its source. So unprocessed cash sits in these secure warehouses waiting for the right off-the-books project to come along. No one can make car payments in cash. You can't make mortgage payments at the bank in cash. If you are caught with cash, law enforcement is authorized to confiscate it as though the cash itself committed a crime under civil forfeiture laws. The truth is that the Obama administration has accumulated billions in unlaundered cash from the sale of, or permitting the sale of, illegal drugs. This cash sits in warehouses and is used to fund criminal activities and terrorism. It is used to buy influence. It is used to trade for arms, political favors, or for lives. One thing is universally well known. Cash is the currency of crime. It cannot be traced. It cannot be accounted for. Boxes or thick envelopes of cash shipped to government officials have purchased more elections than anything else. The money was purportedly only the first installment of a $1.7 billion deal the Obama administration reached with Iran over an arms deal brokered with the Shah of Iran just before the mullahs took over way back in the last century in 1979. Now, it makes sense that Iran would not accept U.S. dollars, as they are notably the largest counterfeiter of U.S. dollars on the planet. No one would trust Iran shipping stacks of dollars to pay for anything. This settlement is so old and so far down the priority list that no one ever expected any administration to pay for it. And yet the Obama administration turned it into the perfect excuse should they get caught for smuggling pallets of unmarked cash to the terrorist regime of Iran. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama have been funding ISIS for years using cash. Valerie Jarrett is serving as the U.S. co-president and has been feeding favors and preferential treatment to Iran since she has been in the White House. The planned excuse of old settlement payments was queued up in case the public pointed out that Iran was releasing Washington Post reporter Jason Rezaian, a former U.S. Marine, and Amir Hekmati, Christian pastor Saeed Abedini, and Nosratollah Khosravi Roodsari, the same exact day, the same exact hour that the cash arrived. Iranian officials reported at the time that the prisoners were released in a prisoner for cash brokered by the Obama administration. The administration also returned 7 Iranian prisoners in exchange for the release of the Americans. Obama also dropped extradition proceedings against another 14 Iranians as part of the deal. No need to extradite these criminals anymore. We'll look the other way. Not only did the Obama administration return 7 Iranians, but it was said that Obama also agreed to drop U.S. sanctions against Iran as the nuclear deal, crafted and brokered by not only Hillary Clinton, but also Barack Obama and now John Kerry. It was felt that the prisoner release was meant to keep Republicans from criticizing Obama's nuclear deal. The timing of these two actions precisely coincided with the release of the U.S. prisoners. In fact, the plane with the prisoners was not allowed to taxi and leave Iran until the plane with the cash landed and was validated. No mention by the press was made of the January 2016 secret transfer of $400 million in cash to Iran until now, because they got caught. The Obama administration has now denied that the pallets of shrink-wrapped cash had anything to do with the hostage release agreement. He is actually laughing at law enforcement because he knows their network of corruption is tight and has been tested in public with the recent decision by the FBI not to prosecute Hillary Clinton. Although the director did spend 14 minutes describing a litany of statutory violations, he clearly and publicly stated the facts of perjury before Congress. Still, because she is the Democrat nominee, no charges have been filed. It remains to be seen if the electorate, that's you, decides to judge her in the court of public opinion. As we've made clear, the negotiations over the settlement of an outstanding claim were completely separate from the discussions about returning our citizens home, State Department spokesman John Kirby told the Journal. Not only were the two negotiations separate, they were conducted by different teams on each side, including, in the case of the Hague claims, by technical experts involved in these negotiations for many years. Purely a coincidence. Nothing to see here. Move along. Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton criticized the revelations accusing Obama of paying a ransom to the Ayatollahs for U.S. hostages, a claim, it would seem, for which the mainstream media, sadly, has absolutely no interest whatsoever. That is not the case on X Word Radio. At a press conference Thursday of this week, Obama remarkably explained, and I quote, "The reason that we had to give them cash is precisely because we are so strict in maintaining sanctions and we do not have a banking relationship with Iran." Really, Mr. President? The whole point of sanctions is to prohibit and punish certain behavior. If you, especially you, Mr. President, do the precise thing that the sanctions prohibit. That is a strange way of being so strict in maintaining them, don't you think? Now, the sanctions at issue exclude Iran from the U.S. financial system by, among other things, prohibiting Americans and financial institutions from engaging in currency transactions that involve Iran's government. Contrary to the nuclear sanctions that Obama's Iran deal attempts to undo, the sanctions pertinent here were imposed primarily as a result of Iran's support for terrorism. That is significant. In pleading with Congress not to disapprove this nuclear plan of his, Obama promised lawmakers that the terrorism sanctions would remain in force. That's why they agreed to it. The ransom that dare not speak its name, terrorism-related sanctions against Iran, trace back to the early 1980s, shortly after the jihadist regime overthrew the Shah, stormed the American embassy, took the hostages, and triggered Hezbollah's killing sprees. You remember this, don't you? When Jimmy Giveaway Panama Canal Carter was president. But the sanctions most relevant for present purposes stem from President Clinton's 1995 invocation of federal laws that deal with national emergencies caused by foreign aggression. Clinton concluded that Iran had caused such an emergency by, among other things, its support for international terrorism, that this was even before Iran killed 19 members of the U.S. Air Force in the 1996 Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia. You remember that, don't you? Truck bomb ran through the barricade and exploded in front of the residential building. To this day, Iran remains on our government's list of state sponsors of terrorism. They are the largest sponsors of terror in the world. Notwithstanding Obama's often shocking appeasement of Tehran, mostly because Valerie Jarrett is the co-president and she is Iranian, as is Huma Abedin, he has been renewing the state of emergency since 2009. Most recently, just 5 months ago. It's not out of his memory. Indeed, it is worth noting what the Obama State Department's latest report on the state sponsors of terrorism has to say about Iran. This is from the first paragraph. Designated as a state sponsor of terrorism in 1984, Iran continued its terrorist-related activity in 2015, including support for Hezbollah, Palestinian terrorist groups in Gaza, and various groups in Iraq and throughout the Middle East. In 2015, this is 2016. This is not ancient history. Iran increased its assistance to Iraqi Shia terrorist groups. Iran used the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to implement foreign policy goals, provide for cover for intelligence operations, create instability in the Middle East. This commitment was reaffirmed by Obama's Treasury Department on January 16, 2016, the implementation day of the nuclear deal with Iran. Treasury's published guidance regarding Iran states that, in general, and I quote, the clearing of U.S. dollar or other currency-denominated transactions through the U.S. financial system or involving a U.S. person remains prohibited by law. It is not just U.S. dollar transactions that are prohibited. Foreign currencies also banned. Obama's cash payment, of course, involved both. Treasury's guidance cites to what's known as the ITSR, the Iranian Transactions and Sanctions Regulations. It's the part of the Code of Federal Regulations that implements anti-terrorism sanctions initiated by President Clinton under federal law. The specific provision cited is Section 560.204. This is what it says. See if you get this clearly, because they sure didn't. The exportation, re-exportation, sale, or supply directly or indirectly from the United States or by a United States person, wherever located, of any goods, technology, or services to Iran or the government of Iran is prohibited. The regulation goes on to stress that this prohibition may not be circumvented by exporting things of value to a person in a third country when one has knowledge or reason to know that such things are intended specifically for supply, transshipment, or re-exportation, directly or indirectly to Iran or the government of Iran. Now, Obama conceded this live at his press conference just a couple days ago. Are you ready for this? He conceded at his press conference both that these sanctions are still in effect and that they applied directly to his $400 million payout to our terrorist enemies. But here's the president's problem. While he is correct that the sanctions barred him from sending Iran a check or wire transfer, that is not all they forbid, not by a long shot. They also make it illegal to do what he did. The sanctions prohibit transactions with Iran that touch the U.S. financial system, whether they are carried out in dollars or foreign currencies. The claim by administration officials, widely repeated in the mainstream press, don't worry, everything's okay, that Iran had to be paid in euros and francs because dollar transactions are forbidden, is absolutely false. Americans are also forbidden to engage in foreign currency transactions with Iran. When it's inconvenient to call it ransom, that Obama had our financial system issue U.S. assets that were then converted to foreign currencies for delivery to Iran, it really starts to stink. Both steps flouted the regulations, which prohibit the clearing of currency of any kind if Iran is even minimally involved in the deal. The regs further prohibit supplying things of value to Iran, regardless of whether it's done directly or indirectly. By his own account, President Obama engaged in the complex cash transfer in order to end-run sanctions that prohibit the U.S. from having a banking relationship with Iran. Forget about calling it ransom. Forget about the sideshow, whether it is or is not ransom. The point of the sanctions, which are law, is not to prevent banking with Iran. It's to prevent Iran from getting value from or through our financial system. The banking prohibition is a corollary. And the point of the sanctions, if you happen to be President of the United States sworn to execute the laws faithfully, is to follow them, not pat yourself on the back for keeping them in place while you willfully evade them. The President's press conference is better understood as a confession rather than an explanation. And that's what I intend to stress in this segment. President Barack Obama confessed to a high crime, a violation of Section 560.701, which makes clear that willful violations of the regulations constitute serious felony offenses under federal criminal law. By the way, it's punishable by up to 20 years imprisonment. The first thing to consider here is the law against providing material support to terrorists. This is Section 2339A of the Federal Penal Code. It says that anyone who provides resources, including currency or monetary instruments, to a person or entity with knowledge that they are to be used in the preparation or carrying out of terrorist offenses is guilty of a serious felony. Anybody. That's how we're busting some of these charities, these so-called charities that are collecting money. They're funneling the money to terrorist activities. The Obama administration has just reaffirmed that Iran remains a state sponsor of terrorism. He said it. He reaffirmed it. Moreover, John Kerry even admitted in January that funds channeled to Iran as part of the nuclear deal would end up in the hands of the Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps or other entities, some of which are labeled terrorists. No doubt that this Revolutionary Guard Corps is a formally designated terrorist organization, as, of course, is Hezbollah, Iran's forward jihadist militia with which the Republican Guard colludes. Now, the second law involves money laundering, and this is a big one. It's criminalized by Congress in Section 1956 of the Penal Code. What does it mean? It means that you have a warehouse full of cash. Well, you can't just go to the bank and say, here, I want to deposit this pallet of cash, because the bank cannot receive it. Why? Because they don't know where the cash came from. Now, if you'll recall, last week I was talking about Miss Steppenfetch. That's Loretta Lynch, our current Attorney General. She was then the District Attorney of Suffolk County, New York, when a dossier was brought to her documenting from a whistleblower inside of HSBC Bank that HSBC Bank was receiving billions of dollars in drug cartel cash from Mexico. Now that is bad enough, but they were putting it into thousands and thousands of phony bank accounts. These people were dead or had fictitious Social Security numbers. In any case, none of these people existed. And the bank officers were putting the money into these accounts, laundering it, and then writing checks out of these accounts for illegal activities all over the world. They were sending it to foundations. They were sending it to companies which were requesting the cash, and the cash was being used for illegal activities. Of course, not all of it, because Ms. Steppenfetch was asked to file a motion of deferred prosecution. In other words, she said, even though I'm this bad attorney general, I'm deciding that I'm not going to bring any charges against you, HSBC. We're going to fine you a little bit, about $1.2 billion, which you already have in this account set aside for the cost of doing business. And then we're going to carry on. Well, guess who was a board member of HSBC Bank while that was going on? Oh, that's a good guess. FBI Director James Comey. That's right. And so when it came time for James Comey to make a recommendation to Miss Steppenfetch, what do you think happened? The grease, the cash from the warehouses of drug cartel cash filled in the gaps, and everything went smoothly. If money is transferred outside the United States, it can be illegal to use it for anything, let alone promoting criminal activity. It's called money laundering. The administration has conducted a financial transaction which facilitated both currency transfers to Iran and Iran's certain use of the money to support terrorism. Plus, the money was shipped outside the United States before being transferred to Iran, before Iran will use it to promote terrorism. Money laundering cases often boil down to proof of intent, but there clearly are multiple grounds on which to investigate whether the laws have been transgressed. The circumstances of Obama's enormous cash transfer, $400 million, absolutely boggles the mind. The average person that hears that on television or on the radio or on X Squared Radio, they say to themselves as they run their fingers through their hair, are you freaking kidding me? $400 million? You realize that would pay off a whole state's debt? Yeah, not their deficit, their debt. But it's sitting in cash in a warehouse, and it came from illegal activity and it's been used illegally. But that should not obscure a more fundamental issue. The president has deliberately violated the law with malice and forethought and must therefore be impeached and must be removed from office immediately. This has to be done as an injunctive action tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Let's listen closely. You have the confession. You have the motive. You have the proof. You have witnesses. Let's get it done. Iran has already executed nuclear engineers that they said were spies. The names of those engineers showed up in Hillary's emails.